I am Eleanor Hayes. Once a published author, I lived in a charming brownstone apartment in Manhattan where everything, from the sunlight through the window to the scent of morning coffee, evoked a sense of peace. I believed I was living the kind of life most people could only dream of. The man I called my husband, Richard Nolan, was a financial consultant. He had a way with words, a gentle tone that knew exactly how to disarm me, a kiss on the forehead each morning, a whisper every night. You are my whole world. Sounds like a fairy tale, doesn't it? I used to think so too. I believed it with all my heart, believed it so deeply that I never once questioned him. Believed it enough to give him everything, from my banking passwords to the very core of my heart. I was the kind of woman society pats on the shoulder and says, "You're so lucky." Yes, I heard that all the time. But what no one knew was this: that so-called luck was nothing more than a beautifully painted mask. Until one night, a night like any other, or at least that's what I thought. Around midnight, I woke up to an empty bed. I didn't think much of it. Richard often got up in the middle of the night, sometimes for water, sometimes to check his investments. I rolled over, about to drift back to sleep, but then I heard his voice, faint, coming from the office at the end of the hall. Familiar, but this time cold and calculated. "She doesn't suspect a thing." I froze. It felt like something had wrapped around my chest and wouldn't let go. I got up, walked quietly down the hall, and pressed my ear against the door, barely ajar. "Almost done," he said next. Just a few words, but I knew right then and there everything had cracked open. I returned to bed and pretended to sleep. Richard came back minutes later, gently pulled the blanket over me, as if nothing had happened. And I, someone who built her career on intuition, knew in that moment that the man beside me was no longer the husband I had once loved. I didn't sleep that night. I just stared at the ceiling, the one place in our home that used to feel like sanctuary. And I understood. Love isn't enough to save someone who's already chosen to betray you. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. My hands were trembling as I made coffee, and for the first time in my life, I opened the banking app. Richard had always handled our finances, not because I didn't know how, but because I thought that's what a good wife does. She trusts, but trust, I was learning, is sometimes the first blade pointed at your back. Dozens of transactions appeared, small amounts at a time: 500, 1,000, 750, 2,000, scattered across the past 3 months. Nothing alarming on its own, but together they formed a pattern, a very ugly one. When I confronted him in the kitchen, holding my coffee like any other day, Richard just shrugged. "Oh, a few small investments. I must have forgotten to mention them." That smile, the one that once melted me, that day it chilled me to the bone. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just nodded and began to look at everything differently, with the eyes of a woman no longer asleep. When you love someone deeply, you stop hearing the warnings. You believe the sweet words over the silent red flags. You become the last person in the room to realize you've been betrayed. I'm not sharing this story for pity. I'm sharing it for the ones like me, the ones who've been overlooked, pushed to the edge of their own lives, left out of secrets they had every right to know. You're not crazy. You're not weak. You just loved too sincerely. I'm Eleanor Hayes, and for a long time I was living in a beautiful illusion. But that night, That was the night I started to wake up. If you've ever felt like you were living inside a golden cage, if you've ever been betrayed by the very person you trusted the most, leave a comment below. I want to hear your story. And if this story speaks to something in you, please share it, because someone out there might need to hear that they're not alone. Don't forget to hit subscribe. Here, we tell the stories the world often tries to silence. And sometimes, the truth itself is the most powerful thing you can hold on to. And if you think the worst already happened, stick around, because the real betrayal was still ahead. A few days later, the opportunity came. For the first time ever, Richard left his phone on the table when he went to take a shower. I picked it up like I was holding a dagger, not sharp, not bloody, but piercing, straight to the bone. The screen was still lit, and there it was, a single message, gray and white, just sitting there like a verdict waiting to be read. Send her the Ilium files, but make sure she stays in the dark. No name, no profile picture, just a string of numbers and a message that sent a chill down my spine. I didn't know what Ilium was. A code name? A project? A cover-up? And I didn't know who her was either, but something deep in my gut, the instinct that's helped me write dozens of villains into fiction, told me the truth. It was me. And if I was right, then this wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was a setup, a plan, a long game. I placed the phone back exactly where Richard had left it, wiped the screen gently with my sleeve, just in case, and then I walked to the kitchen. I splashed cold water on my face, ice against skin, but my insides were burning. From the bathroom, the water kept running. The house was still, the kind of stillness you only notice when you realize nothing is what it seems. I looked up and saw myself in the mirror. And I didn't see the same Eleanor Hayes, the one who once believed love could fix every crack, the one who thought Richard was a shelter, a home, a safe place to land. No, I saw a woman about to go to war. The next morning, the rain fell in soft streaks across the windows, like the universe whispering a quiet warning. Richard left the house like always. A kiss on the forehead, the same smile, the same voice, like he hadn't already carved a blade into my trust. I waited until the door clicked shut and the sound of his shoes disappeared down the hallway. Then I picked up my phone and I called Julia Bennett, my college best friend, now one of the sharpest estate attorneys in New York. We had fallen out of touch for a few years, but a chance meeting at a bookstore last summer had reconnected us. What I didn't expect was that the first real phone call I'd make to her again would be a cry for help. Her voice sounded exactly the same, calm, clear, focused, unafraid. I told her everything, the secret withdrawals, the Ilium message. My voice stayed steady, for the most part, but there were moments it cracked, from shame, from fear, or maybe from the ache of realizing I'd just lost half my life without even knowing it. On the other end of the line, she was quiet. Then she asked me one question. "Eleanor, how much money are we talking about?" I took a breath, like I was about to confess a sin. "Close to $500,000, not counting book royalties, the apartment, or our investments." She didn't hesitate, not for a second. "We need to act now. If we wait, he'll make his next move, and next time you might lose everything." Within 72 hours, I was living like someone running from a burning wreck behind her. Julia worked like a machine. She didn't comfort me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She sent contracts, documents, instructions. She looped in her legal team. Sign here, transfer that, set up the trust. There was no time for grief, only survival. The Manhattan apartment, what once was our home, was now under the name of a personal trust. The investment accounts were locked down. Everything that used to be ours had become off limits, at least to Richard. On the third day, when Richard came home, he was holding a box of Chinese takeout, just like always. He smiled, kissed me on the forehead. "I thought about Thai tonight," he said, "but then I remembered you like lo mein." I took the box from his hands, nodded, smiled, said nothing about the assets I'd just moved, said nothing about the doors I had closed, locked, and thrown the keys into the ocean. He had no idea, no suspicion, no clue that the woman sitting across from him was no longer the Eleanor from all those golden years. 4 days later, Richard made his first move. It was a Friday afternoon. The sky was clear, the sunlight soft and golden, like the world still believed everything was fine. Richard came home early, dressed in his deep gray suit, the one he wore when he wanted to look serious. His cologne trailed behind him, familiar and calculated. I was sitting at the dining table like usual, one hand flipping through my notebook, the other stirring a cup of tea that had long gone cold. He walked in, placed his leather briefcase on the chair, poured himself a glass of water, playing the part of the thoughtful husband to perfection. Then he sat down across from me. "We need to talk," he began, his voice low but controlled, as if rehearsed. I nodded silently. He slid a folder across the table. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. My tea was still warm in my hand, and I was ready for this, had been ready for it after so many sleepless nights. I opened the folder slowly. The first page said it all: petition for divorce. Below that, our names, typed neatly in Times New Roman, size 12. Too clean, too cold, for something that used to be called love. "I think this is the best way forward for both of us," Richard continued, not blinking. "We've changed too much. I don't want this to get more painful than it needs to be." I looked him in the eyes, and some small part of me hoped I'd catch a flicker of hesitation, some sign that this wasn't just a calculated step in a strategy. But no, every word, every movement had been choreographed, practiced, pre-planned. He didn't walk into that room with a heart. He walked in with a strategy. I set the folder down, then looked up, slowly, calmly, deliberately. "Before you take another step, there's something you should know." He froze. I held his gaze. I didn't flinch. "Everything's already been moved. The apartment, the investment accounts, the book royalties. They're all in a private trust now, fully legal. You won't touch a single cent." For a moment, his face turned white as paper. His lips parted, dry, struggling for words. His voice came out shaky. You can't do that. That's marital property." I didn't respond right away. I just stared at him, like a mirror reflecting the man he had truly become. "I already did," I said firmly. His hand clenched the edge of the table, knuckles pale and shaking. The vein in his neck stood out, tight with rage. "What kind of game are you playing, Eleanor?" "The one you started," I answered, steady, quiet, unyielding. "You handed me divorce papers. You were the one siphoning money behind my back for months. You sent messages about the Ilium files and how to keep me in the dark. So if you're surprised that I finally protected myself, ask yourself this: are you angry at me or at yourself? for thinking I'd always be the fool you could control. Richard shot up from his chair. "We'll see each other in court," he growled. I stood too, no shouting, no drama, just looked at him with eyes that no longer held tears. Go ahead, try. When the door slammed shut behind him, the apartment fell into a silence so thick it nearly swallowed me. I stood there in the space we used to call home, a place where we once shared quiet breakfasts and late-night stories. Now it was just brick walls and memories. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just exhaled. For the first time in weeks, as if I had taken back the right to breathe in my own space. I thought I had reached the end of betrayal, that after protecting my assets, I had escaped the trap. But I forgot one thing. When a man loses control, he will stop at nothing to regain power. And Richard Nolan, he was never the kind of man who could accept defeat. The post went up on a Monday morning, on an anonymous financial forum, the kind where rumors spread like wildfire. The title was simple but suggestive. CFO hides assets in divorce using company funds. Beneath it was a short paragraph dripping with poison. A high-ranking female executive, let's call her E.H., recently moved a suspicious amount of money into a private account just before filing for divorce. Coincidence? Doubtful. And then came the gut punch, a comment right below it. I know who it is, Eleanor Hayes. Check her transactions before July. I saw it at exactly 6:47 a.m., just as I was about to make coffee. My hand clenched around the phone. My thumbs shook, not from fear, but from fury. I wasn't scared. I was furious. Furious that after everything, he still thought he had the right to twist the truth, spin a narrative, and throw it in my face like a warning. Richard wasn't going after the money anymore. He was targeting something I had spent my entire life building, my reputation. I called Julia Bennett immediately. Her voice dropped when I told her what had happened. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't shaken. Just a long, tired sigh. "He's trying to corner you," Julia said, tapping her fingers on the desk. "If he drags your name through the mud, you'll be more likely to settle on his terms, even if you don't deserve any of it." "I'm not backing down," I said, my voice cold. "Then we fight," she replied. That same afternoon, Julia sent a takedown notice to the site and a legal warning stating that if the false information kept circulating, we would pursue a defamation lawsuit. We backed up everything: screenshots, timestamps, IP traces. But as expected, the account was fake. The username was a throwaway. The IP address had been masked through a VPN. A ghost. 3 days later, Richard responded, not with a call, not with a word, but with a stack of documents, nearly 100 pages thick, delivered to my front door. A court summons. Richard Nolan was suing me, Eleanor Hayes, for financial fraud. The allegations: deliberately hiding marital assets, misusing investment accounts, and illegally transferring funds to avoid fair division during divorce. And his co-plaintiff, someone I had never met before, was a man named Victor Dane. The name made my blood run cold. I had seen it once before. In that message on Richard's phone. "Send her the Ilium files. Just make sure she stays in the dark." Ilium, Dane. I didn't need further proof. It was all planned, all of it. I sat in Julia's office, the folder open on her desk. Every page felt like a blade pressed deeper into my dignity. The accusations were written just vaguely enough to be insidious. Phrases like evidence suggests, possible indicators, warrants further examination. No outright lies, just enough implication to destroy someone's name. Who is Victor Dane? I asked, still staring down at the documents. Julia looked up. He's a known fraudster, never formally convicted, but his name shows up in dozens of investigations, false documents, money laundering, even forged evidence in high-asset divorce cases. I flipped to the appendix. Fake bank statements, forged wire transfers, fabricated signatures. Some of the signatures looked eerily close to mine. Some of the transfers matched my real account details, except they never happened. These are fabrications, I said, gripping the edge of the chair. That's not my signature. Those transactions don't exist. We know, Julia said calmly, but now you have to prove it in court. From that day on, this wasn't just a defense anymore. It was a counterattack, and my only weapon was the truth. Julia brought in the experts, legal analysts, financial investigators, signature verification specialists, and a digital forensics team. We started combing through every single transaction from the past 3 years, every wire transfer, every investment contract, every email, every printed statement. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I made checklists, cross-referenced timestamps, analyzed signatures, and scrutinized every tiny detail. Not because I was afraid of losing, but because I knew that even a single mistake could make me the poster child for the narrative, "Powerful woman hides assets during divorce." Richard didn't just want to win, he wanted to make an example out of me, a warning to any woman who dared to stand up for herself. 1 week later, the financial expert delivered the first report. Every piece of evidence submitted by Richard's team could be traced back to a company operated by Victor Dane. The signatures? Close, but not identical, skillfully forged, but still forgeries. The dates? Didn't match the email logs or system access records. And most importantly, there were no real transactions in any banking system that supported the alleged wire transfers. I read the last page of the report, which stated clearly, "There is no verifiable evidence indicating Eleanor Hayes conducted any of the transactions outlined in the complaint." I didn't cry. I simply closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift inside me. Not peace, but a fire that had sharpened into something cold and precise, resolve. I once thought that if I ever had to face the man I used to call my husband in court, I would fall apart, that I would tremble, that I would be too heartbroken to hold my head up. But that morning, I walked into the courtroom with my back straight, no lipstick, no mascara. But my gaze was sharp like a blade I had been sharpening with every betrayal. Beside me sat Julia Bennett, a woman who didn't need to raise her voice to command a room. Across from me was Richard Nolan, the same man who once whispered love into my ears, and the same man who now tried to bury me with the same hands that once held mine. He sat in a perfectly tailored navy suit, but his face was pale. For the first time in years, he looked like he'd finally realized I wasn't the same Eleanor he used to manipulate. The trial opened with the plaintiff's testimony. One by one, the accusations were read aloud. Misappropriation, abuse of executive position, forgery, Hidden transactions, each line delivered in a dry, rehearsed tone by his attorney. I didn't react, not because I didn't feel the weight of those words, but because I had already carried them, already survived them. They didn't cut anymore. They just made me sick. Sick of how far he was willing to go to continue the war he started. Then it was Julia's turn. She didn't waste time arguing. She laid it out, calm, direct, razor sharp. Every piece of evidence came from a company tied to Victor Dane, a known name in falsified legal documents, involved in multiple high-asset divorce scandals. The signatures didn't match Eleanor's known, verified signatures with the bank, her publishers, or any legal contracts she had signed in the past. And all the alleged wire transfers didn't exist in the banking system. No transaction logs, no email confirmations, nothing, just a paper trail created in the shadows. She ended with one sentence, looking directly at the judge. You can construct a story. You can pay someone to write an entire file, but you can't fake the truth. I remember that moment clearly. The courtroom went completely silent. Only the sound of papers rustling and the quiet, steady breathing of the clerk filled the space. Richard didn't look at me. He looked down, out the window, anywhere except into the eyes of the woman whose name he tried to drag through the dirt. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I said nothing. Because when the truth is clear enough, it doesn't need a defense. It stands on its own. The court went into deliberation. When the judge finally returned to deliver the verdict, his words echoed like a distant hum in my ears. The court dismisses all claims from the plaintiff. There is insufficient evidence to support any allegations of financial fraud by Eleanor Hayes. Plaintiff is ordered to pay all legal fees incurred by the defendant. After the trial, I walked into the hallway. Julia was beside me, eyes glued to her phone, already texting our media contact to prepare the official statement. I said nothing, just kept walking, because I knew there was still a long road ahead, and I didn't have time to stop. Richard caught up with me as we passed the elevators. He stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes staring off into space. You didn't have to do this, he said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. I turned slowly, not angry, not bitter, just calm. The kind of calm that comes from someone who's finally learned that kindness is not owed to those who never offered it. No, Richard, I replied. You didn't have to do this. And then I turned and walked away. I didn't celebrate. There was no wine, no applause, no fancy dinner to toast a victory. I just sat quietly on an old wooden bench in Central Park. Autumn brushed the trees around me. Golden leaves floated down in waves, as if letting go without warning. A cool breeze touched my neck, but I didn't shiver. I pulled out my worn leather notebook, turned to a blank page, and wrote. Each word, slow, unforced, not chasing inspiration, just writing to remind myself that I was still here, still whole after everything. I had gone through a storm, not with screaming or breaking things, but with clarity. Every time Richard Nolan came at me, with hidden messages, shady transfers, accusations, legal files, I didn't fight back with excuses. I fought with the truth. The truth, the very thing he believed I'd never be brave enough to hold on to. He was wrong. Victory doesn't always sound like cheers. It's not always stepping out of a courtroom to flashing cameras and clapping hands. No one was waiting for me outside with flowers or banners. No one said, You did it. It was just me, alone, in the middle of a crowded park, at the end of a long day, surrounded by strangers who had no idea what I just survived. And the feeling I had wasn't pride, it wasn't joy, it was peace. Peace, because I no longer had to pretend to be strong in a home built on lies. Because I no longer had to wonder if my husband was telling me the truth. Because I no longer had to put my faith in someone who used love as a weapon. I had reclaimed something I had almost lost forever, the right to own my life. I learned something, a bitter truth, but a necessary one. Trust is a gift. You can give it, but you should never trade yourself in for it. Love should never mean handing over your entire power to someone else. No matter how deeply someone claims to love you still have the right to keep something for yourself, your clarity, your freedom, and your self-respect. And if someone betrays you, what you need to do is not beg, not strike back, but stand. Stand up with the quiet strength of someone who finally knows their worth. I used to be afraid of being left behind. Used to believe that without Richard, I would fall apart. Used to think I was weak because I let love lead me blindly. But the truth is, I was never weak. I just loved deeply. And when that love was betrayed, I didn't die. I woke up. In the days following the trial, I avoided interviews, turned down talk shows, refused to let the media turn my story into entertainment because I didn't want to sell it to people who only came for drama. I wanted to keep it for those who truly needed it. For the women reading shady messages on their husband's phone, but still doubting their instincts. For the ones asking themselves, am I crazy for feeling like something's wrong? You're not crazy. You're just waking up from a dream someone else scripted for you. Today, as I sit here writing the final lines of this story, I'm no longer the Eleanor Hayes who collapsed on the kitchen floor, sobbing after discovering one more lie. I'm Eleanor Hayes, an author, a survivor, a woman who refuses to let betrayal define her. I don't wish what I went through on anyone. But if you have, or if you're walking through your own storm right now, remember this. You have the right to stand up. You have the right to say no. You have the right to demand the truth. No one, not even the person who once whispered, "You're my whole world," has the right to make you lose yourself. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt lost in the dark, bent by a love that wasn't real, you are not alone. Leave a comment below. Share your story, if you're ready, because sometimes just one person speaking up is enough to help someone else rise. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this, true stories, raw and painful, but also filled with hope, hit subscribe. Because here, we don't tell stories to make people cry. We tell them to remind you may fall, but you always have the right to rise.